Welcome back to Not Your Forte, a music education podcast geared towards music ed students to help you survive and thrive throughout your undergrad. I'm Eric Tinkler, a fourth-year music education student here at Kansas State University. As always, I'm joined by my fantastic co-host, Dr. Phillip Payne, the music ed chair here at K-State as well. Dr. Payne, you got a guest you'd like to introduce?
Yeah, we've got a special guest today joining us on the podcast for our season finale, looking at conducting from the podium. Is Dr. Michael Raiber. He is currently the director of bands at Mustang Central Middle School in Mustang, Oklahoma, and is a co-author. Those of you that are listeners from K-State and probably around the country, he's a co-author of Journey from Music Student to Teacher, and most recently was our president of the Southwest Division of NAFME. So we'd like to welcome Dr. Raiber to the podcast.
Thanks, guys. I'm really excited to be here. I appreciate it.
All right. So one of the things that I wanted to start with, we've been going through all sorts of topics from the basics of conducting, score study, everything that we do as a conductor. But I would love to focus on the roles that we take on as music teachers in the classroom. So yes, conducting is part of that. But just talk a little bit about the various roles that we take on when we take over our first music classroom.
Okay, well, we've got 6 hours for this podcast, right?
Right.
You've got, when you talk about men, there's going to be all kinds of them. You know, I think, first of all, I like thinking about these roles like being a manager. You're managing a space, and in that management, that space includes, of course, all the other human beings that are there with you in that classroom. And so all the things that come into place in managing effective work among people with each other. I mean, that's really important. So, as you're managing everything from the second they hit the door to the second they leave, the last one's out the door, you're managing every aspect of those interactions. So, first of all, learning how to set up really clear expectations for your students about, even simple things like, this is how we enter a classroom. This is how we get prepared for rehearsal. Here's how we, take care of our instruments. And of course, that's, it's age appropriate at various different levels at which you work. When you're working with your beginners, I mean, it is down to the nth level of minutia. This is where you are. This is where you put your case. This is how you set it on the floor. All of those things. So you've got to manage all of that stuff. And that can get pretty immense. You do have to manage the physical space itself. How do you set up the classroom? How is your space organized so that it works most efficiently for your students, works most efficiently for the learning styles in which you're working, down to the points, honestly, of, where students would sit in the classroom and how they would be organized there. One example for me this year, my third band, I have a wonderful little trumpet player who is incredibly autistic, amazing young student, but cannot be around other people within arm's reach. He just cannot manage that. So setting up the space meant that he had to have a space all of his own in order to manage everything else. Once I figured that out, and I gotta be honest, it took me a little while to work my way through that until we finally figured out what the issue was. But once we figured that out, he was able to be incredibly successful. So I think, you've got to think along those lines of management as well. And then management of time. You've got very limited time to work with each of these students in the classroom. And your use of time is a curricular decision. I want to make sure I make that really clear. Your use of time is a curricular decision, because how you engage students over time is the way that your curriculum works its way out. And so you can have all these wonderful ideas and all these other things that are working well for you, but until you manage your time effectively with your students, your curriculum does not engage the ways that you plan for it to engage. So, I think those are the three big ones for me in managing, or in working off the podium: managing with the other human beings in the classroom, managing the physical space, and then managing the time within all of that. And then the last one, okay, is managing the environment. Okay, and by environment, I mean the way the classroom feels, the way the space feels. When they come in there, I mean, I want my students to walk into a classroom where they feel like, this is home. This is a place where I can be me. We talk about this often in my classrooms. Well, and I say my classrooms, there are classrooms, but in the classroom space that I share with my students, we talk about what would it be like to be in a place where you knew that everyone else here, their only concern was to help you be better. Would that be a place you would want to be? And if it is, then how do we make that space that way? And so on the door outside the band room, just as you walk in, there's a sign on the door that says, "Have you been secretly awesome today?" And we talk about coming in and being secretly awesome. All right. How can you be secretly awesome and give of yourself to somebody else today without any expectation in return? So managing that environment along with all those other things is, I think, the key to helping us be able to do all those other things. Once those things are managed and put well in place, then my conducting technique may have some impact on what happens in the classroom. Okay. Until then, I'm not quite sure that we will.
So we're talking a lot about kind of the idea of a manager, and both you and Dr. Payne have a lot of teaching experience, a lot of time in front of students. What kind of advice or what resources do you think are available to a young teacher? I know going throughout my undergrad, I've been lucky enough to have a good amount of time on a podium, good amount of time teaching, but these are still skills that I need to develop and continue to develop. And I think experience is an awesome tool here. But when you're starting out in that first job, how do you develop that role as a manager?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost, as a beginning teacher, is to recognize the things that you don't know. You must come to realize the things that you're just not expert at or not able to manage yet. The best people I know are the people who know what they don't know. Right, and then find the other resources to be able to fill those gaps. I think one of the mistakes that young teachers make most often is they live in kind of this fear that other people are going to think that they don't know what they're doing. Okay? And so they kind of hunker down and just try to do what they can do. Well, here's the news flash. You're a first-year teacher. We know you don't know what you're doing yet. Okay, so reach out, all right, and ask for help. The best first-year teachers that I've ever worked with have been the ones that have been very open into those ideas and saying, "Hey, I got my head wrapped around this. I have no idea what's going on over here. How do I take care of this?" So I think the best advice you can give for any first-year teacher is, number one, ask for help. Those areas that you're just not sure about, ask for help. I think we're afraid that when we ask for help, we're admitting weakness, when honestly, when we ask for help, we're admitting our strengths. Right, we are recognizing the fact that my responsibility in the classroom is to be the most effective teacher I can be for the students who are entering my classroom. If I'm not willing to admit the areas where I can't do that yet, then I'm failing in my responsibilities in that regard. And so I need to be able to step up and do those things. So mentors, find a mentor. Find somebody that you can work with on a regular basis, and somebody that and to be honest, I think you need to be careful about finding your mentors. I think you need to find the right mentor, okay? Because there are many out there who will come and say, "Well, in my day, this is the way we did it." I don't know why I always say that with a Texas accent. I should do that. But, they'll come in and just kind of take over and say, this is the way you do something. And I think I've always advised teachers that I've worked with that anytime anybody walks in and says, "This is the way," you need to be very careful of that, because teaching is an art, and there are many different ways to manage that. And your job as an educator is to develop, the analogy I've used is kind of a quiver of arrows. You need to have a whole selection of things that you can pull from and work with. And then the master teacher is the one who knows exactly which one to use when, right? And be able to make those decisions. But they've got those things in their bag of tricks, so to speak, so that they can work through those things.
And I love the metaphor of the quiver of arrows, because that kind of leads us into one of my next questions, is that going into the classroom for the first time, all of our graduates are used to having a separate class for theory, a separate class for history, a separate class for private lessons, and then ensembles. And so everything has been so compartmentalized. And when they step into the classroom for the first time, now all of those are consolidated within them. What advice would you give to those first-year teachers that are working through how to, and we can use the word manage again, all of those thoughts and ideas going through their head the first year of teaching?
Yeah. Well, I just flashed back to my very first day of teaching. I started teaching at Normandy High School in St. Louis, Missouri. It's an inner city school. I went through guard gate and all that to get to my band room every day. Worked with an amazing educator who mentored me in this process as well. And I remember that first day of stepping up on the podium with my concert band and giving a downbeat and hearing the sound come back at me and thinking, oh my gosh, I really do not like that sound. And I have no idea what to do next. Okay. And so I did the typical band director thing. I said, okay, let's do that again. Like somehow magically it's going to get better the second time. It didn't. Okay. And I had to start figuring my way through that. The reason why is I think, as I look back on that, and I've watched many young teachers work through the same process, is you get overwhelmed. It is that moment where all of these things come together and all of a sudden you just like, and it can be debilitating. So I think advice number one is, when you're there, make sure you're picking what you're teaching. Know what you're teaching when. And, there are times when we need to teach music. There are times when we need to teach how to read notation, how to count rhythms, how to understand plagal cadences, those things. We need to understand that we're teaching music. There are times when we need to teach clarinet, or we need to teach trumpet, and we need to fix articulations and approaches and pedagogical approaches to the instrument. Okay. There are many times when we need to address the social well-being of the students in our classroom. And so understanding that I'm dealing with the social emotional learning that's taking place here. All right. Being able to look at those things and understand that I have to manage these multiple roles, but I can't do all those things at once. All right. I need to be able to go back and say, this is what I'm managing right now. All right. And then I'll work through these other pieces. Now, again, going on to being a master teacher, you're able to work in that space while you're planning for the next 3 steps that are coming up in the next 5 minutes, okay, as you're working through that. That's where that practical experience in the classroom, going back to what Eric was saying, this is why that on the podium experience, being there in front of musicians and kids who are learning how to do this, that's why that's so important, because the only way to learn how to manage that effectively is being put in that space where you have to do that. I believe it really is a skill. It's a skill that has to be developed like any other skill. You have to do that repetitively enough that you can manage that over time and be able to put those things together so that I can manage this piece of instruction in one place and be thinking ahead that, all right, next thing I need to get to is the trombones have got to work on, making an even slur between these 2 notes. And then I've got to get to the tubas who still can't manage their fingerings on their low Fs. All right. And I'm working through all of those pieces and realize that Taylor over here still needs to have my attention because he's having a meltdown today. And I really need to spend some time with him and help him focus on those things as well. So, that's the multiple pieces that you work with. But I think really important in the beginning, just to know what you're teaching and why you're teaching it.
I think a really important thing that you said is during your kind of early years teaching, when you got on that podium first time, you just had them play. It's like, I don't like that sound and stuff. And I know in time I've spent on a podium and any of my peers who I've talked about, like when they're first on and they hear a sound that they don't like, it's like, okay. And like you said, it's like, what do I do? What do I do about it? I can't just tell them to try it again and hope it gets better. What's kind of like that hierarchy of like, let's focus on kind of like the music aspect of this first. Sure. What's that hierarchy of listening when you're on that podium?
Well, and this is why over years and when I was teaching at the University of Oklahoma, and was very fortunate to have a number of great graduate students there. One of them was Dr. Payne, and others that that were there. Another gentleman that I would really invite you to spend some time and look. He's just got a new book out. Dr. Pasquale. Okay, is doing some amazing stuff at the University of Michigan. He was there, and as a team, we worked on a process of what we call directed listening, okay, recognizing the fact that our ears were being overwhelmed. And so the hierarchy with which we work in our directed listening approach is, first of all, from an ensemble perspective, we need to understand that this is ensemble level pedagogy, not individual instrument pedagogy. This is ensemble level pedagogy. So when we're talking about working with the ensemble, step number 1 is just making sure that things are occurring together. Right? Are they occurring at the right time? Are the sounds starting together and stopping together? And so first priority is just getting up and just listening for those things. Are things occurring in pulse, in time, together? All right. Until we get those things to happen, there's not much else we can do. Now, I think one of the telltale signs is I see in young teachers that haven't organized this way will get up and they'll give a downbeat and they'll hear those sounds coming back at them, and they realize they've got to say something, but they don't know what to say yet. But they stop, and usually their first comments are about dynamics, okay, or balance. Those are the first two, dynamics and balance. Those are the things that stand out to them the most. And again, I teach with a lot of analogies. The analogy I give them is, the house is on fire and you're rearranging the drapes. All right, we got to make sure that we deal with the issues that are most important first. All right, and when things aren't occurring together, we can't do much of anything else. So that's step number one. Step number two is then looking at what we call the body of sound. All right, what happens inside the start and stop? So what is the shape of sounds that I'm hearing? What's the quality of sound that I'm hearing? Okay, what's the articulation weight at the beginning of the sound? What's the shape of the sound at the end? Okay, so we're dealing with all of those more, I don't want to say more meticulous, but all of the detailed elements that happen in between the start and the stop of sound. Okay, once those things are being organized together and we're starting and stopping together, we're playing with a unified articulation style at the beginning, we're playing with a unified note shape, we're playing with unified note lengths. Okay, all of those things are being defined and managed. Then we can get to the point where we start to deal with balance. Okay? And balance, looking at this and saying, am I hearing what, number one, the composer intended to be heard in this composition? Number two, what I interpret in this composition as the conductor, what the students interpret in this as performers. And we get to put all of those ideas together, all right, and work through that. So then we balance the elements till we get the quality of ensemble sound that we want, and the melodic to non-melodic relationships put together the way we would like to have them. And then once we deal with that, then we can begin to deal with what we call more, and I still don't like this term, we're going to find another one for it, but we do what we call what we call musicality, which I really think is more direction than anything else, musical direction. And is how is the composer using elements of music to create direction in music? One of the things that I tell my students all the time, we have Dr. Raiber's rules to better musicianship. And one of those rules is that music either goes to or comes from somewhere. Rarely is music static. Okay, all apologies to Stephen Reich, but rarely is music static. All right, so we're able to look at these things and figure out, all right, how does the composer create direction in this music? Does the composer create direction through volume? And we look at dynamic considerations. Does the composer create direction through harmonic relationships and tension and release? Does the composer create direction through increased or decreased rhythmic activity? All right, and then how do we interpret that in the music? And we can get to that point and start making those decisions. I think we'd all agree that when we get to that level and are making those decisions, that's really the quote unquote fun part of what we do. Now I'll say I love doing all the other stuff too. That's fun for me as well. But I think when we get to that point, we realize we're working at that level. That's the moments when students' eyes really start to light up and you start to see them come to realize that they can really make something beautiful. And when they get to do that, that's pretty cool.
Well, one thing I want to jump on there is that you use the term "we" a lot. So can you talk a little bit about when we make those decisions? Can you talk about the student's role in
Sure.
helping you make that decision as a conductor?
Yeah, well, I guess I first should say I am a recovering band director, which means that I am, I'm trying to learn how to give up control. All right. I love having a very student-centered classroom. I love having a place where we collaborate. And in fact, I have a set of rules in my classroom for rehearsals, in our classroom, see, there I go, slipping again, in our classroom for rehearsals, where we're able to talk about these things. Step number one is make mistakes and make them often. All right. And my students do look at me like I've got four heads when I tell them that. And I'm honest with them and say that if you're not making mistakes, you're not making efforts. All right. Now, here's the secret. Never make the same mistake twice. All right. You just keep working and you make new mistakes, find new mistakes and make them. So we do that. Step number two is that this is a collaborative space. Okay. And often when I'm working from the podium, I do not give a lot of directive information. I ask a lot of questions. All right. You will stop and it'll be, all right, listen to that sound. All right. And I want you to talk to the person next to you for the next 30 seconds about two things that you would do to change the quality of that sound in the ensemble. All right. And I'll give them 30 seconds to talk to each other. And then the next step is to look at it and say, all right, Eric, what did John tell you? All right. So I'm not asking for John, Eric, what did John tell you? This opens up, this is again, that part of that social emotional learning of opening up the space for them to be able to share ideas. All right. And particularly at the middle school level, they're really afraid to share their ideas because they're afraid to be wrong. All right. And no matter how you work on talking through that, you have to work them through. So when I ask Eric to share John's ideas, all right, Eric doesn't have to own those. Eric just shares them. All right. And then John can own the parts of it that he wants to own. Okay. And it really does open up the space for us to be able to do that. Once that space is open, then they start sharing their ideas regularly. All right. I do a lot of opportunities where we do cooperative learning groups. When I distribute a new piece of music, the students will walk in and they'll see pods set up all around the classroom. And I tell them, find your music, have a seat, and within your pod, and sometimes those pods are like instruments, they're sections. Sometimes they're mixed instruments, depending on the piece, whatnot. And for the first half hour, they have to figure out what this piece is about, how they would go about rehearsing this piece, what are the challenges they see in their music, what would they like to do in rehearsal to prepare this piece. Play through as much of it as they can, work on a little bit of sight reading, find those places that they think might give them some technical problems or whatever, and work through that. And then we pull it back together and have a conversation about, all right, what is this piece? What is it about? How are we going to go about learning this piece? And what kind of rehearsal structure do you want with this? Do you think we need to split up for the next two rehearsals in sectionals? Would that help you put this piece together? Do you think this piece is one of those where it really is more, we need more collaborative time together to be able to make that work? And I have to be willing to I almost use the word acquiesce, and that's really not what I want to say there. I need to be willing to facilitate, that's a much better word, facilitate their opportunities to be able to do those things. All right. And then, open up the space to be able to make that happen. So it could be, that on Monday, we're in cooperative learning groups, putting those things together, and they come up with all these ideas. And then I'm at home on Monday night, figuring out over the next 2 weeks, how do I enact these things for them in the classroom and make those things work together. Now, all that said, I do still hold veto power. So there are times that we come up with some ideas and it's like, no, that's not going to work, guys. Let's try again. Okay. And we work through that. But to be honest, I had to use that more at the beginning of the year. But, this last time we did that, they were on target. Boom. We were ready to go, and they had a really good plan in place.
So you talked. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
I think something that one thing that it's a struggle for beginning conductors and stuff like that, beginning teachers, is it comes down to rep selection. You're mentioning just like distributing out music and stuff like that. I know for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been playing college level literature and things like that. And while sometimes in our conducting or our ed classes, we get some exposure to like, how do we, like, what kind of rep to select? Like, what's that process? And what are some like resources available to select the right repertoire to play for your ensemble?
Wow, you guys ask these big questions, okay? And very important. The repertoire that is in the ensemble, the repertoire that's in your classroom, is the vehicle through which you are engaging your students. Okay? There's an old, I think, instrumentalist article out there that said, the repertoire is the curriculum, and yikes, that one scares me. The repertoire is the vehicle. It is the means by which we're engaging students in the classroom. I'm not teaching March of the Middle Sea Twins. That's not what I'm teaching. I'm teaching all the things that piece can do to help students engage with themselves, with each other, and with music through that repertoire. And so I think that's really important when you start thinking about selecting repertoire. If I want my students to be able to engage in their musical understandings about tension and release, let's just say, that I really want this concept of tension and release in music to become apparent to them. Then I need to find repertoire that, number one, has that as a primary element of its compositional construction. But I also need to find repertoire that is going to work at a level at which that they're not struggling with notes all the time, and they can deal with these issues. Now, at the same time, I need to find a repertoire that's going to challenge them technically, all right? But it's not going to be in the same piece, all right? Often. It could be, but I'm going to be thinking about these things and working across those ways. Now, resources to find repertoire. Number one, you guys are so fortunate, and I realized this when I came back to teaching the classroom this year. There's this really cool thing out there called YouTube, okay? And there is a ton of information out there. I mean, the idea that somebody mentions a piece to me and I think, oh, I really like to hear that, and I can jump on YouTube and I can pull up a recording, right? And I can listen to that piece instantaneously. Wow. Okay. There used to be this time when I had to get a car and go to what we called a record store and buy things and bring them home. Okay. When I first started teaching, that was it. I made cassette tape after cassette tape after cassette tape of everything that I could find so that I had reference for me and for my students to listen to. Now it's at 2 clicks away. So, I mean, listen like crazy. Other things to go to, if you can get to Midwest Clinic, get there. I mean, there is open repertoire all the time, all right, and at all levels. And it's just incredibly important to get out there and hear those things. Find those really, great educators out there and pick their brains constantly about repertoire. Okay? What pieces that they enjoy, what are the great teaching pieces? That's usually my first question I ask. It's not what's your favorite piece, but what are the greatest teaching pieces that you've ever used? All right. And what do they teach? I think it goes back to when I first started teaching, I went to the local music store, and they had a collection of all of the repertoire in our prescribed music list for the state of Oklahoma, in binders and records or tapes of all of those. And I would go down there every Saturday and sit and listen to stuff. I just pull out a notebook and start at one end and work my way through. And then we'd have, the older stalwart band directors would walk in and, lean over your shoulder. And I still remember one of them, he'd come in all the time and lean over my shoulder and look at what I was listening to. And he'd say, well, you don't want to play that with your band. And I was like, okay, tell me why. And first of all, he'd say, oh, I've heard your band. And then we'd laugh about that. And then, and then I'd ask him, and it's like, okay, tell me what are the issues in this piece? And he'd start pointing out things, and we'd start looking through things. And I really learned how to take a piece apart, not just from a technical score study perspective, but from a teaching score study perspective. And I think those are two different things, right? And we need to look at that as what are going to be the elements we need to teach in this piece and make that work. And so as you understand that and then equate that to what you want to achieve in your classroom with this piece of music as the vehicle through which you're achieving those outcomes, then you can marry those two things together. Okay? And you can look at those. Again, just like our quiver of arrows in teaching, you have to have a broad range of understanding of repertoire at various different levels for you to be able to make those decisions. And the only way to go about that is listening and listening and listening and listening. And when you get tired of listening, listen a little bit more, right? Because it's just critical that you grow your understanding of those and those opportunities. And the resources are tremendous right now.
And I would piggyback onto that just a little bit, just talking about what Dr. Raiber mentioned about teaching conceptually, and those what are we teaching through the performance of that piece. One resource that I'd like to share with the podcast also is a book called Shaping Sound Musicians by Patricia O'Toole. It's a great, it encapsulates everything that Dr. Raiber just said and just kind of puts it into, it's a very easy read, but it's a must own for early music educators so that they understand how to approach, when he talked about approaching score study from a teaching perspective, it really gives you a framework for how to make that work. So I highly suggest that as well. Dr. Raiber, talk a little bit about the importance of singing, both as a conductor, but also weaving singing into your rehearsals on a regular basis.
Yeah, our first instrument is our voice. All right, and we need to be able to use it to our advantage. Now, it doesn't mean we need to be operatic performers, but it does mean we need to be able to use that in a musical sense. The idea, I'm a brass player, and so I think about this, and I tell my young brass players all the time, if you can't sing it, the likelihood of you playing it is 1 in 20, because when you put that finger down, who knows what's coming out the other end unless you can hear it. All right. So, woodwinds have got a little bit better chance that, but we still have issues that we need to work with there. And percussionists, I mean, who knows? No, I'm kidding. Okay. They have got to be the best musicians in the band. All right. They've got to be the best musicians in your ensemble. And so their ability to sing and express themselves that way is critically important as well. Starting at the very beginning. All right. I use a completely oral-based curriculum for my beginners. We don't read music until after our first quarter. So our first quarter, we are singing folk tunes. We're learning how to solfege those folk tunes, and then we're learning how to transfer that solfege to our instrument. So if you think about teaching at the beginning level, I'm teaching their oral skills and their oral understanding in one space. I'm teaching their executive skills on their instrument in another space. And when we first start out, those are two very distinct things that are happening in the classroom. We're singing and we're understanding what we're doing with our singing. We're learning how to put our instrument together. We're learning how to form embouchures. We're learning hand positions. We're learning all those other things. And they don't seem connected at first with the students. And then over time, we start putting those things together so that, when they begin to understand that they can play mi, re, do, all right, and that's happening on their instrument on a regular basis, then I can transfer that over to hot cross buns that we've been singing for the last 3 weeks, all right? And when they hear it before they play it, they begin to make that understanding. So at the beginning level, that's critically important, right? Then we transfer that oral understanding to the page. It's not all that dissimilar from the way you learned how to read to begin with. When you first learned how to read spoken or read written words, right, you already had a spoken vocabulary. Right? We're developing a spoken vocabulary for our students on their instruments and then transferring that vocabulary to the page so that they go look at reading music with understanding and not look at it as decoding which finger goes down when. All right. And that is a critical step at the beginning. Moving on then into the ensemble itself, doing those things. We sing in rehearsals a lot. Now, one of the things that I would tell you is that singing, especially for younger students, is really scary for them. If they haven't done that, it's a scary endeavor for them. So we start, first of all, by humming. Humming is safe. They can hear it. They can get it in their head. They don't feel like they're doing it. They don't feel exposed to all that other stuff. And so we hum a lot. I'll have them hum their parts. We'll hum all of our daily drill. We hum Remington exercises with drones. We do all of that just to get them. I'm building a skill within them that they can begin to use and feel comfortable with. Once we've got that safe classroom environment started, then all we have to do once we're done humming is just open our mouth and voila, we are singing. All right. And they feel comfortable with that. Sing simple things first. All right. Develop their skill first. Help them be comfortable in singing around each other. All right. Once that is done, then you can start to apply that to all the other things that are happening in their music, and they get very comfortable with doing that. So it gets to the point where it's not uncommon when you can say, all right, woodwinds, would you hum, or woodwinds, I need for you to sing your parts right here. Brass, would you buzz your parts? All right. And we'll make these two things work, and we'll get those back together, and then I'll switch those back and forth so we can begin to work through that process. For the conductor, singing is absolutely essential. All right.
So,
if you can't sing through your scores, you're in trouble.
So let's dive into a little bit, kind of a more nuts and bolts question, and
Sure.
something that Dr. Payne's put on my mind throughout beginning band methods class that I'm in right now. How do you design your beginning class, and how has that approach developed the longer you've been teaching?
Well, man, I loved, this is my first year back in the public school classroom in 25 years. All right. I started teaching. I taught for 10 years in public school in St. Louis and then in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and 13 years actually. And then started my degree work and then went on into teacher education and was there for 25 years. And now back in the classroom. So, coming back now and hopefully, thinking, well, maybe I'll do it right this time has been really a big help. And one of the places I enjoyed that the most is in my beginning classroom. So, structurally, what do we do? We've already talked about all of the other stuff that we have to get set up for our beginning band students before they get started, right? So let's assume that we've put all those foundations in place, that we have a great environment that they're working in. We've developed relationships with them. We've done those things at the beginning. And the nuts and bolts of getting down to learning how to play the instrument and make music together is where we are right now. So I want to make sure we understand that this is not day one activity, okay? But when we are beginning to work on those things, again, in my lesson plans, I literally have the page split in half. As I look at it, and on one half of the page, I'm talking about their oral skills and musical understanding that we're developing in rehearsal, and then on the other side, executive skills. that we're developing. Now in my planning, I've planned out the entire quarter, and you have to when you're doing this this way, because you have to know at what point these two things are going to intersect each other. And so you have to kind of reverse engineer this whole process. So, within 4 weeks, students are going to be playing hot cross buns, melody and bass line together, right? That's where I know where I'm going. Now, as I start backing that out and saying, okay, what executive skills do my trumpet players need to have to be able to do that? What executive skills do the trombone players need to be able to do that? What executive skills do the flute players, all of those things. So I'm taking all those executive skills all the way back the beginning, which means today we're starting with the label goes on top of the case, all right, and work my way from there up to that other point. Same thing with their executive skills, with their oral skills, is what do we need to put in place for them to be able to develop their oral skills as well? What pattern teaching do I need to do with them? And we do sing, we sing tonal patterns and we sing rhythmic patterns. So I'm developing their tonal understanding and the rhythmic understanding in both of those elements. So on the oral skills side, you'll see tonal understanding and what we're doing with that, and then rhythmic understanding and what we're doing with that. One of the issues that we have with beginning instruction, and particularly with beginning method books, is the fact that we stay major duple 98% of the time, all right? And students have never been exposed to minor triple at all. And so, I'm developing other skills for them and other activities where we can make these things work differently. So, we can learn to play lightly row, and we can learn to sing lightly row. I should say, I'm sorry. We can sing lightly row in duple time. Bing, bum, 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 bum. Then we can learn how to sing it and feel it in triple. Bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum. This is, 6/8 time is not a mystery to anybody. It's just that we don't ever do it. All right. I would say the same thing about the key of F sharp. It's not difficult. It's just not familiar. All right. And so I think these are things where we need to expose our students into those areas and work it through that so that we can get that to happen. Now, once you put all those things together and you plan those things to work, then you have that magic moment. And it really is a magical day in the classroom when the students suddenly discover, I know everything I need to know to be able to play hot cross buns. I understand it in my head. I can hear it. I know what I need to do on my instrument to get that to happen. And I can take what's in my head and transfer it to my instrument. And we have to take time to allow them to be able to do that. I don't teach them hot cross buns. I teach them how to sing hot cross buns. I teach them how to do things with that vocally. I teach them the executive skills on their instrument. And I keep moving these two things closer and closer together until they discover, I can do this. Because what I want to do is empower that process from that point forward. Because once they understand that, then it's like, what other songs can I play? What else can I do? Boom, and they're off and running, all right? And that's, I think, what we want to do with helping them understand their ability to make music, which is the most important part for me in their music making, is that they can make music that they love and they enjoy and allows them to express themselves. Once they do that, then we can start to pull all these things together, and I can expose them to new repertoire that gives them opportunities to express them a little bit more than hot cross buttons or lightly row or all those other things. They've got increased skill and increased understandings where they can move their way into those other things and begin to realize, I really want to play the Hindeman Symphony of something. And in order to do that, here are the things that I need to be able to do. It's not different. It's just grown up. Okay?
Can you talk a little bit about the role of modeling? And
sure.
And we can start from the role of modeling in the beginning classroom to how modeling is integrated into your teaching in the ensemble.
Yeah. At the beginning level, it is absolutely critical and essential. Now, I want to make sure that I help everybody understand. I believe an effective musical model is critically important to your teaching. Does it have to be an effective musical model on flute in a flute class or on trumpet in a trumpet class? Ideally, that's what we're working toward. Now, the idea that you would have the executive skills on every one of those instruments to model effectively at those levels is an expectation that may be beyond quite a few of us, all right? And so I believe it is better for me, particularly in a clarinet class, it is better for me to model on trumpet than it is for me to model on clarinet. I still struggle with clarinet and have forever. It's just the way things work for me. I will never be a great clarinet player. I would much rather have my students hear a good musical model on my trumpet and emulate that on clarinet than to try to model that on clarinet with my clarinet skills. All right. Now, again, back to the idea that we have this wonderful world of technology where I can find all kinds of great clarinet models out there that they can listen to. Okay, and that I can help them work through that. So I think step number one is make sure that whatever model you use is effective musical model, that it's always characteristic tone, that it's always very musical in its expression. Just because we're playing in the beginning, just because we're playing hot cross buns does not mean that I just play it, static. I'm always playing with phrasing. I'm always playing with shape. I'm always playing with those things so that the students emulate those things without even really understanding what they're doing yet. They're just working through that. This is the way we play, all right? And this is the shape that we make, and make those things happen. At the upper levels in modeling, again, I think using your voice to model is a very important thing, okay? That you can model things effectively with your voice, that you can sing shapes of lines the way you would like them to be played, and that you can work your way through that so that you can move quickly through that process. Again, going back to our first steps in time management and effectiveness. Unless I have really abundant instrumental skills and all of the instruments and resources around me to be able to make that happen, I don't know that I can model everything on every single instrument, all right? But I can model with my voice. I can model on my primary instrument or secondaries that I feel very comfortable with, all right? And be able to make those things work. Now, the other resource we have in the classroom are great students who can model as well, okay? And we need to use those to our advantage. And I like probably that as the default for me more than anything else once they've got the skills in place. So in my middle school classroom, student models are used very often, okay? And we work through that so that they can have the opportunity to be able to share those with each other and demonstrate to the students that this is possible. It's one thing when Dr. Raiber plays that on his trumpet and everybody goes, well, when I'm old and gray like he is, I'll be able to do that too. When Johnny's sitting next to him and is able to do that, and they go, oh, well, if he can do that, I can do that. All right. And I think that's a really important step for them as well.
So we spent a lot of time just talking about skills for within the classroom and everything. Let's turn the focus towards what we can do before we go out there and start teaching. Let's what's some advice you would give out to college freshmen just starting out? To what can you start and how can you get on a good role so you're on this path of working to become the best educator you can?
Yeah, I think the most important thing early on is really getting a clear understanding of the profession and your role within the profession, right? Everybody comes in, when you enter into your degree as a music educator, I think we all come in with this idea in mind of what a music educator is, right? And it's what we call this apprenticeship of observation, right? We've watched what's going on in a classroom. We've made some sort of assessment of what it takes to be able to do that. And we've decided that this is something we'd like to do. Now, and a lot of times that's a very romanticized approach to teaching. We've looked at that and think, oh, this is, and we don't get to see all the nuts and bolts behind all of that. So I think what we have to do, first of all, is kind of get past that observation or the observation that it doesn't really, it's not fully informed. So step number one is really dig in and find out what music teaching is all about. This is why the Intro to Music Ed course, I think, is so critically important, that we really look at that and start to say, this is what music teaching is, and this is what it can be. And I think both of those things are important. And then this is your potential role as you look at this. How are you developing your role as a music educator? And in that, then you come to that point of commitment one way or the other. Right? I've always said at the end of the music ed or the Intro to Music Ed course, students should really be making one of two decisions. Either, man, if that's what music teaching is, I would rather ask people if they want fries with that every day for the rest of my life than do this. I'm going to change my major and go do something else. Or if that's what music teaching is, I got it. I'm in. I know what I want to do, and this is it. Because when you make that commitment to music education and thinking like an educator, you think differently about your education. No longer is it about what do I need to do to get an A in this course and get out of here? Because that's been the mindset that we've been in for a large part of our education up to this point. When we think about our education as professional development, now we look at this and say, what is it that I take from this that helps me in my engagement with the future student who's walking into my classroom? Now, I think this is really important for freshmen, particularly to understand if they think about this. And I ask this question often, think back to 4 years ago. All right. 4 years ago, you were a freshman in high school. All right. Now think to where you are right now. In some ways that seems like a lifetime. In some ways it seems like it was just yesterday. All right. Now project yourself 4 years from now. 4 years from now, you're standing in front of your first classroom, the first students that you will engage with. And by the way, they already exist on the planet. They are already here. Your life and their life is on this trajectory where it's going to intersect each other, right? What are you doing in this next 4 years that is going to empower that intersection to be the greatest potential, or to reach its greatest potential, right? And yeah, that means everything you do in your education is leading to that point, all right? So all those things that are there are going to be very important. So I think that commitment to my professional development early on is going to be critical for me as a freshman.
So extending then onto that, our listeners who are getting ready to student teach, whether that be this fall or next spring, any pieces of advice for them?
I think, well, I've talked about this before, one of the things that I love about teacher education, working with this, and we work in this and it's kind of distinct parts, so we have beginning pedagogy classes and we have advanced pedagogy classes. And we've already talked about all the compartmentalization we have in our process. And in many cases, it's necessary to deal with the details with which we're doing. In working in that, I love watching students put pieces together, all right? And they're putting the pieces together in, say, their beginning pedagogy class, their beginning instruments class, and they're starting to put certain pieces together. And during the class time, they've constructed this part of the puzzle for them. And that's great. The unfortunate thing is once they leave that space and to move on to other more distinct ideas, sometimes those pieces tend to float apart a little bit because we're not dealing with them every day, all right? And we've got other things that are coming into play. One of the things that I think is really important for those who are moving into their student teaching is realizing that their student teaching the time is the time when they take all of those pieces that they likely had put together pretty well at one time and may not have as clearly constructed now, right? And move into their student teaching time and start putting these pieces together in such a ways that they actually fit. And in that sense, what happens, again, one of my analogies, I feel like you put together this corner of the puzzle in this class, and this corner of the puzzle in this class, and the center in this class. And when you get to student teaching, you finally get to pull all those things together and realize this whole thing makes a picture. And I get to make that picture, I get to construct that picture in a way that it makes sense to me, all right? And once that makes sense and we see that as a greater whole, it's more likely to stay together. All right, instead of floating apart. So I think really important is to go back and look at those distinct pieces of the puzzle, but then figuring out ways that you can put this together into the whole. Because when you construct a whole, you hang on to it longer. All right, and that's really critically important during your student teaching. I think that's the most important part of your student teaching, is figuring out that picture of what you're gonna take with you on into your profession.
And I think with our first year teachers, those that are graduating this year, and our listeners that are getting ready to take their first job, and maybe you can share a little bit about your experience going back into the classroom this year, having, I share with our students that fuller and bound moment where you walk in and you hear that first time and like 95% just goes past you and you have no idea what goes on. And what resonated with me was hearing you talk about the first time that you were in front of the OSU marching band for the first time, and you got done with rehearsal and you were like, I have no idea what just happened. But maybe talk with them, share a little bit about what they're going to experience those first couple weeks of maybe their first semester of teaching, and how we address that.
Yeah. And the whole fill and bound thing where we start with self-concerns, right? And it's all there. And then we move into our teaching concerns and then finally, into student learning concerns. It is perfectly human and will occur. It has to me again. And even with my work this year, There are times, first meeting the kids and first time working with them and still getting to that point where it's like, gosh, I hope they like me. I hope they don't think I'm too old to teach middle school. A lot of things that came into mind there that were still very self-concerned. So I think we need to realize that is perfectly natural and it's human and it's where we work. Now, the critical piece is realizing that and then moving ourselves on to those next stages, right, and working through that process. So the best advice I can give at this point is always concern yourself with what are the students doing and how are they doing it? Are they engaged? Are they part of what's taking place? And if they're not, then let's figure out another way to engage them. Let's figure out another way to get them involved. Right? Because as long as my concerns are about student learning and about what they take from the classroom with them, then I don't have to worry so much about the other pieces. Now, as a young teacher, we're going to get locked into teaching concerns often because we're just still working our way through the pedagogy, right? And we're working through that, and that's okay, all right? We work through that, but then when we get to the end of that, the reflective piece after that is so critically important. It's like, okay, now I think I understand how I want to teach my clarinets to articulate like this. Now I need to take the next step and make sure I'm engaging students in that process. All right, and we have to give ourselves latitude as teachers to be able to work our way through those steps. All right, this is not a process of going in and beating ourselves up in reflection. It's a process of going in and realizing, all right, this is what happened today, and here's what I'd like to have happen tomorrow. Here's how I'm going to take that next step. All right, and I'm going to realize that this may be a 15-step process till I get where I really would like to be, and I'm going to give myself permission to take all 15 of those steps to get there, because I can't just leap from one place to the other. And as a beginning teacher, as an early teacher, I think we really have to help ourselves or allow ourselves to be able to do that and to work our way through that process while we're still availing ourselves to all the resources we can get to help us take those steps in the most efficient method possible.
So our last question today, really, we want to bring it back to current events, and that's the idea of the pandemic and how that has impacted teaching, especially with music teachers and music educators across the country. How do you see that? It's a two-part question. One, how has your foundation in these areas we've talked about today, how has it flourished and expanded during this time? And how do you see it moving forward?
Yeah. I think, and I think this goes across the board with education right now, that moving instruction to the points that we've had to, whether that's been distance learning or, live online learning, and all the different ways that we can talk about that. It's necessitated each one of us as educators to get to the essence of what we do. Right? What is it that we really want students to know and understand and take from this process? Right? Because that's all the time that we've got to work. So for me in music education, it came right down to, how do they know themselves and know others around them and develop effective relationships through their music making? That's what we teach. All right. The essence of where we are. So, the social emotional learning outcomes became primary in everything that I'm doing right now. One example, my sixth graders today are submitting videos of their home concerts that they've been planning over the last 3 weeks. And we've been working them through this process. And the goal of their home concert is to alleviate stress and anxiety in their home today for just whatever time they've got. How could they, through their music making, make their home a brighter place for whatever time they could do that? All right. And so they've had to look through their music to decide what pieces might work for them. And these are lines out of a beginning band book. All right, so they've made their selections, they've planned their rehearsals, they've worked their way through that, and today they're going to perform their concerts and then reflect on that. And so how did my music making affect the other people around me? That's what we're doing. I'm sorry, I'm such a nerd. I'm sitting here getting goosebumps talking about it. That is just, it's so incredible to think as an 11, 12-year-old that I realized through my music making, I have the power to be able to engage other people in meaningful ways and help their lives be better through my music making. Oh my gosh, why wouldn't I want to do that for the rest of my life? All right, and I think that's what we're trying to work through. My 7th and 8th graders are doing same things. They've had to collaborate on some of this online. And one of the pieces that they perform today has to be self-composed. So it doesn't have to be long, but they've all written their own, for most of them, it sounds like a jingle. So it's pretty good. Okay, but they put those together. So tried to work in some compositional pieces with that as well, so that I can get to. And if I think of this in terms of standards, I'm spending a lot more time right now in their create standards and in the response standards and the connection standards than I really am in the performance standards. So we're able to engage even more broadly, perhaps, than we could on a regular basis to be able to make that happen. So I think those are the critical pieces that we've gotten to. And when I sat down and said, all right, once I knew this was a reality, then it was asking myself that honest question of what is it that I wanted students to walk away with at the end of this year? This is it. Okay? And then how can I empower that from a distance perspective through email and Zoom and Google Classroom and whatever resources we've got to be able to make that happen. It's not the way I want to do it. The lack of face-to-face instruction is excruciating. I do teach them online lessons right now to some of my students. After the very first one, working with one of my beginning tuba players, and he did a great job, and we were excited, and he was doing really well. And I got off that, and I was overwhelmed at the end of that lesson, as the feeling that came back to me was like, I feel like myself again. I feel like me, because I spent 35, 40 minutes here teaching a student how to be a better musician one-on-one, and we could see that come to life and see that he was developing tools that then he could take and use in his home concert. All right, through that. And the idea of a home concert with a beginning tuba player, he's only been playing for 6 weeks. So, very special parents this afternoon, I think.
Yes. Well, Dr. Raiber, thank you so much for giving up of your time to be able to share your expertise with our listeners. And as always, just such a wealth of knowledge and great. And it's a great refresher for me, having spent those years studying under you. And it's great to hear the analogies and being able to take this back to our students. And I know the ripple effect will be great through this podcast. So thank you again for all of your time. And Eric, do you want any closing thoughts?
Just once again, Dr. Raiber, thank you so much for joining in. It's such a pleasure to have master educators, and we're very fortunate to be in this position to where we're able to reach out, and that the music education community is such a small community where everyone wants to help, because the goal is to give the best you can to the students, and I think that's absolutely phenomenal. Dr. Raiber, is there any way that the listeners can reach out to you, a good email or a good way to contact you if they have extra questions or anything you'd like to talk about that's upcoming for you? Sure.
And anytime anybody wants to get in touch, my email is really easy to find, but it's raiberm@mustangps.org. Okay. And, if you just go to Mustang Public Schools and type in Raiber, I'm the only one there. So, it's pretty easy to find. All right. And work through that. The last thing I would just like to say to all the listeners is thank you. Thank you for choosing to be a music educator. All right. It is not an easy choice. All right. And the longer that works through school, sometimes it gets increasingly difficult. And so thank you for choosing to be that music educator that's going to change the lives of students. I have never apologized for this, and some people tell me sometimes that it's very Pollyannish, but I teach because I believe that as teachers, we change the world. We affect change where we are, and we're going to make our world a better place because kids are going to understand themselves and understand the people around them better through making music. And I just really, really appreciate anybody who has made the commitment to be able to do that. You're not going to do it for the fabulous hour, the great pay, and the super working conditions. You can do it because you love people, you love kids, and you really have this desire to make things better. Okay? And that's just awesome. So thank you so much for choosing to do that.
And thank you to all of our listeners. We've had another successful season. And again, this is the season finale. We're going to take about a 2-week hiatus, and then we're going to come back and we're going to be talking about developing leadership and what you can do to be a better leader, both in your school, your community, and your nation. So again, thank you for our listeners. Be sure you rate us 5 stars. It helps easier to find us, and you can check us out on all platforms of podcasts. So Apple Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, we're there. Be sure you continue to rate us 5 stars and check us out, subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you after our break. Thanks again, and we'll see you all later.